Did you really just highlight that invoice? Brent said, loud enough for the entire conference room to pause mid-sip of their ethically sourced coffee. Jesus, Michelle, maybe if you spent half as much time updating your mindset as you do highlighting line items, we wouldn't be stuck in this meeting. That was the first punch. The second came when he leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and smirked like a man who thought sarcasm was a leadership style. Sorry, folks, some of us are still stuck in the 90s. Michelle here thinks vendor audits are a red flag. He made air quotes, then winked at the interns. Adorable. The room laughed nervously, but they laughed. Michelle didn't. She stared down at the vendor invoice in question. 4 identical line items billed to a firm that didn't exist 6 months ago for blockchain API development consulting. Whatever the hell that meant. The sum? Just shy of $140,000. Same line showed up 3 months ago, and 2 months before that. She had notes, dates, a flagged ZIP code. The address, funny enough, led to a UPS drop box wedged between a vape shop and a defunct tanning salon. But none of that mattered now, because Brent, the CFO who thought compliance was optional and charm could white out fraud, had just made her the punchline. The silence after that moment was louder than the mockery. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just shut the folder, stood up, and nodded once. Her voice, when it came, was flat as Midwestern winter. Check page 6. You'll want to look at the timestamps. She walked out. Thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, security showed up at her desk. No warning, no explanation. Just HR with a cardboard box and a script that started with "we're restructuring" and ended with "your email's been deactivated." Didn't even give her time to finish logging out of her pension portal. Brent stood nearby during the whole walk of shame, arms folded like he was watching someone return a defective toaster to Best Buy. "You'll never work here again," he muttered, smug and low, like it was a curse and a promise all rolled into one. That line, it burned hotter than the betrayal. And if you're still listening right now, do us a solid and hit that subscribe button. 97% of you listen, gasp and rage without subscribing. And every click tells our small, caffeine-addled team that you want more of these jaw-droppers. Plus, it seriously pisses off people like Brent, which is just a bonus. Michelle didn't cry, not in the lobby, not in the car, not even when her building keycard made that sad little beep of rejection. But when she got home, after peeling off her blazer and staring at the outline of her nameplate still pressed into her purse, she sat on the kitchen floor with a glass of wine and the realization that 20 years had just been wiped off the board by one smug bastard with a PowerPoint and a grudge. But here's the thing about Michelle. She didn't get to where she was by folding. Something smelled off in those books. And it wasn't just Brent's Axe body spray and recycled buzzwords. She knew there were bigger ghosts in the machine, kickbacks, phantom vendors, maybe even federal crimes if the wrong or right person looked closely. She wasn't going to look, not yet. She was tired, humiliated, and empty. But the books were dirty, and deep down she knew this wasn't over, not even close. The next morning felt like waking up with the flu and a divorce all in one. Michelle sat in her robe, knees pulled to her chest, watching the toaster reflect her face back in warped chrome. Her inbox was a ghost town, no farewell messages, no solidarity, just silence. The people she'd mentored vanished. Her boss from 3 years ago, the one who cried during her retirement speech? Nothing. The junior analysts she defended from Brent's tantrums left her on read. Everyone knew Brent held grudges like antique collectors held porcelain obsessively, with weird pride, and nobody wanted to be collateral damage. She flipped through old performance reviews, not because she needed validation, because she couldn't quite believe she was the villain in someone's version of this story. Michelle brings rigor and integrity to every process. Michelle's financial instincts are unmatched. Michelle identifies risks faster than our software. And yet here she was, discarded like a sandwich left too long in the office fridge. No call, no HR appeal, not even Cobra instructions. She microwaved a lean cuisine and stared at it for 15 minutes. The noodles congealed into one sad, beige lump. She didn't eat it. By day 2, she'd scrubbed her LinkedIn profile 3 times and deleted it once. She tried to list 20 years of forensic accounting leadership without sounding like a rejected BuzzFeed quiz. Brent's voice looped in her head every time she typed. Too uptight, too old school, too much. By day 3, she'd gone full spiral, tracking news articles for any sign of a scandal, refreshing the sex database like it was a slot machine, even Googling how to anonymously report vendor fraud. Each result mocked her. She didn't want revenge, she wanted dignity back. But hell if those two weren't starting to overlap. That night, after 2 glasses of Cabernet and 1 failed attempt at yoga stretching her back cracked like a haunted dollhouse, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, she played it. "Hey, Michelle. Julia from grad school? God, it's been forever. Look, I just heard what happened. Brent's still a tool, huh? Listen, I might have something. We're reviewing a few federal contracts and we need someone who actually knows what due diligence means. Call me. Seriously, I think this could be good." She listened to it twice. Then again. Julia Mercado. The girl who once broke a tax code mid-exam because she thought the IRS phrasing was a crime against logic. She was brilliant, ballsy, and apparently running a consultancy now. Michelle sat back, heart pounding like she'd run up a hill. It wasn't a job offer, not yet, but it was a crack in the concrete, a voice that didn't treat her like a pariah. A maybe, and a maybe was more than she'd had all week. She pressed callback, then paused. Someone who knows what due diligence means, Julia had said. Michelle did. Intimately, obsessively, down to the decimal, and for the first time in days. Flicker lit somewhere behind her eyes. She wasn't dead in the water. Not if Julia was throwing her a rope. Julia's office was nothing like the sterile cubes Michelle had suffered under Brent. It smelled like eucalyptus and printer toner, and the coffee didn't taste like melted regret. Michelle sat in a clean but cluttered conference room, surrounded by dry erase walls covered in phrases like traceable controls and independent review chain, and for the first time in weeks, didn't feel like a ghost, just out of place, like a war medic stepping into a Pilates studio. Julia swept in wearing a blazer over yoga pants and holding a mug that said Audit Queen. Same old Julia, loud, brilliant, chaotic. You look tired, Julia said, setting the mug down, but not broken. Michelle offered the ghost of a smirk. Thanks, I think. They skipped the pleasantries. Julia laid it out fast, short-term contract, NDA thicker than a phone book. Flexible hours. Most of the work was internal triage, screening potential whistleblower reports for credibility, fraud markers, escalation value. Not glamorous, not permanent, but it was work. Work that mattered. Michelle hesitated over the NDA. Her hands still trembled a little when she signed her name, but she signed it. The first few days were foggy. Julia's team worked like caffeine-fueled librarians, quiet but lethal. Michelle spent hours combing through flagged emails, invoice scans, HR notes from anonymous tips. Half the reports were junk, disgruntled exes, confused accountants, bad Excel math, but a few had teeth, and Michelle knew teeth when she saw them. The routine steadied her. Her brain, long dulled by office politics and Brent's ego theatrics, began snapping back to life. Patterns emerged. Numbers whispered secrets. She found herself humming again while she worked, tapping notes like she used to before Brent made her a walking apology. On the 8th day, she opened a triage folder labeled WH043 and something inside her lungs locked. It was just a PDF at first. Basic stuff, names redacted, summary memo, timeline of expense irregularities, but the dates were familiar. The payment types, familiar. The format of the vendor names? No, it couldn't be. She scrolled further. Screenshots. Login page for internal systems she knew like muscle memory. An invoice template, identical to the one she'd flagged in that conference room. Her heart froze mid-beat when she hit the metadata. Originating company, Exphoria Logistics Inc., Brent's company, her old company. Julia walked by, paused, and glanced at the screen. You okay? Michelle didn't look up. Her mouth went dry. This is my old firm. Julia's eyebrows climbed. You serious? Michelle nodded. Still staring. These are his vendors, Brent's. That's his ghost firm structure. I flagged these 6 months ago. Nobody listened. Julia crossed her arms, expression unreadable now. Well, they're listening now. This one's been flagged for escalation. If it checks out, the board's already shopping third-party auditors. Big account. Michelle didn't blink. You're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Julia shrugged, tone casual but razor-edged. I'm just saying. If you happen to know the architecture, if you could speak the language, it'd make the review cleaner. Michelle leaned back slowly, the air suddenly heavier. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She wasn't looking for revenge, not really. She wanted justice, clarity, maybe closure. But still, what were the odds? Of all the contracts, all the companies, the one she now held in her hand like a live grenade was his. Michelle closed the file, set it on the desk like it might detonate. I know the system, she said, voice calm. Inside and out. Julia grinned. That's what I hoped you'd say. Michelle was sipping cold brew and scrolling through procurement logs when Julia burst into the war room like a game show host with a bombshell prize. Guess who just landed a $1 million per week audit gig? Michelle blinked. Please don't say who I think you're about to say. Julia slapped a folder down on the table, grinning like a wolf in a cashmere blazer. Exphoria Logistics. Regulatory board got wind of the internal whistleblower file, and the execs are scrambling to show they're proactively cooperating. They want a third-party team. Independent, clean, and viciously competent. Sound like anyone we know? Michelle stared at the folder. It looked too normal. Standard navy blue, tabbed, clipped. But her name was paper-clipped on the front. Lead auditor. You sure you want me on this? She asked, voice low. Julia didn't flinch. No one knows the shell games like you. Their board didn't just approve you, they requested a senior forensic lead with prior systems knowledge. You're the only one in our pool who meets that bill. Michelle leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You know what he did to me. Julia tilted her head. I know, I also know what you're capable of. I'm not asking you to get revenge, I'm asking you to do what you've always done. Catch ghosts in spreadsheets. There was a long pause. Michelle traced a finger over the folder. Her name looked foreign, almost fictional in this context. She had spent 2 decades being overlooked by louder voices, smoother talkers. Brent had built a kingdom of flash and fog, while she had quietly kept the engines running. Then he exiled her for noticing the fuel lines were leaking. But now the board, the actual board, wanted her to tear open the walls and check the pipes, and they were paying her 7 figures a week to do it. She nodded once, sharp and slow. I'm in. Julia exhaled, the smile dropping into something serious. Good, just one thing, I need you cold on this. No heat. If it gets personal, we lose credibility. Michelle's mouth curled at the corner. Don't worry. I'll let the numbers do the talking. By Friday, her team had access to Exporia's systems under audit authorization. They were ghosted in, no flashy announcements, no dramatic arrivals. The staff only knew a third-party compliance firm had been brought in to help align things ahead of a government contract. Nobody knew who was behind it yet. Least of all, Brent. Michelle worked quietly, methodically, like a surgeon with a grudge she'd buried in favor of clean incisions. Her office was temporary, glass-walled, set in the same building where she'd been humiliated and marched out with a cardboard box. Now she sat across from that same conference room, only this time she was the one holding the scalpel. Every time someone passed her desk and said, "Need anything, ma'am?" she smiled and said just the truth. She reviewed invoice histories, double-checked vendor logs, and dug through data backups that hadn't been touched in years. There were already signs of rot. Invoices processed outside procurement guidelines, timestamp mismatches, wire transfers flagged for consulting fees that went to LLCs registered in Montana PO boxes. Michelle took notes. She cross-referenced addresses, highlighted recurring names. Every day she found another breadcrumb. And every day she thought about Brent. She didn't flinch when she passed the break room where he'd once called her too rigid in front of interns. Didn't even blink when she noticed her old cubicle had been replaced by a printer cart. She just kept auditing. She didn't gloat, didn't sneer, didn't leak a word to anyone, because Brent didn't know she was there. Not yet. The first thread snapped loose on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in an IT service retainer labeled Quick Core Systems, LLC. It was supposed to be a cloud optimization firm, charged $28,000 monthly for hybrid AI architecture deployment. Sounded impressive. Problem was, Michelle had seen their supposed project summary before, nearly word for word, from a different vendor. 3 audits ago, she dug deeper. Quick Core's registered business address, a garage in Dayton, Ohio. She cross-checked the name on the incorporation paperwork, Derek Owens. That name rang a sour bell. She pulled up a holiday party RSVP list from 3 years prior. There he was, listed as Brent's brother-in-law +1, lactose-free. Michelle sat back in her chair and exhaled slowly through her nose. Her hands didn't shake. Not anymore. The air around her felt colder somehow, like the numbers themselves were whispering secrets she'd been right about all along. By Thursday, she had a list. Not 1 or 2 vendors, 12. All filed under inflated contracts with technical jargon so bloated it could have floated. The naming patterns were sloppy: Tech Core, Core Tech, Core Vis, like Brent got bored halfway through fabricating them. She mapped out the payout chains. Invoice right arrow shell company right arrow payout within 5 business days. No vetting, no verification. Just rubber stamps from 2 departments, both of which now reported directly to Brent after last year's restructuring. She moved on to interviews. Most staff were polite but stiff. Eyes flicking toward the exit, voices carefully neutral. A few gave her the usual lines, "Everything looked fine to me. Brent said we had board approval, I assumed someone else was checking that stuff." But the tension was there. Fear, or worse, familiarity with the rot, like they'd been breathing the moldy air too long to notice the smell. Then came Zach. Zach was a junior analyst, 26, hairline already surrendering, eyes twitchy from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. He wore a tie like it was trying to strangle him. Michelle called him in under the pretext of clarifying procurement entries. Midway through reviewing a $64K tech seminar expense, his hands started to tremble. I didn't process that one directly," he said, voice cracking like bad veneer, "but I've seen it on 3 separate projects. Same vendor, same date structure, just different departments." Michelle didn't say a word, she just waited. Zach's voice dropped. "Look, I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but there's a file, hidden one on our internal drive. You have to search with a backslash and underscore to see it. Brent doesn't know I know, but some of us noticed." Michelle nodded slowly. "Where does it trace?" He swallowed. "Owens Street, that garage unit on the west side. I passed it once on accident, no signage. Just a mailbox and a locked roll-up door. Who owns it?" Zach glanced at the glass wall, leaned in. "Derek Owens, Brent's wife's brother." Michelle sat back and tapped her pen twice against the notepad, then she closed it. "Zach," she said evenly, "you didn't say anything today. You helped clarify some invoice formatting, that's all." He blinked twice, nodded like he'd just been handed a flotation device. Back at her desk, Michelle began building a timeline. Payment structures, vendor creation dates, cross-referenced approvals with internal memos Brent had signed himself. Every piece painted the same picture. Brent wasn't just gaming the system, he was the system. A one-man funnel of inflated tech contracts, funneled through trusted names and repackaged as innovation. Michelle didn't feel triumphant. She felt surgical. Cold, precise, locked in. Brent thought he'd buried the bones too deep for anyone to find, but he hadn't counted on the woman he tried to humiliate being the one leading the autopsy. And she was just getting started. Started with a calendar change. Brent's assistant canceled 2 networking lunches and 1 investor call, all in the same hour. Then the email silence began. Normally, Brent was a one-man digital foghorn, mass blasts about synergy, velocity, and whatever word salad passed for strategy that week. Now, nothing, just one-liners and terse forwards. And the hallway walk, you could feel it slower, stiffer, like he'd started hearing footsteps behind him. Even in carpeted hallways, Michelle noticed, not because she was looking for signs of weakness, but because patterns mattered, and Brent's pattern had shifted. By week 2, his questions started trickling in through his lieutenants. Is this audit? Routine? How long do third-party reviews usually last? What if some files were miscategorized? Michelle answered every inquiry with the same tone, cool, crisp, professional. Her reports came stamped with documentation, charts, and timelines. No adjectives, no emotion, just numbers that bled like truth. She didn't hide, but she didn't wave a flag either. She signed every report with her full name. She CC'd the board's legal rep on every summary. It wasn't her job to be invisible, it was her job to be right. Then the rumors started. It began in whispers at the elevators, phrases like conflict of interest and grudge audit. One manager asked her directly, too friendly by half. You used to work here? She smiled politely. No, I survived here. A compliance officer from Julia's firm caught her in the stairwell. Just so you know, he said quietly, someone upstairs thinks there's a vendetta in play. Not from me, obviously, but Brent's been sniffing for names. Michelle nodded once. He can sniff all he wants. The math doesn't care. Later that day, Julia forwarded her an email from Brent. Subject line, Audit Team Leadership Clarity. His message was short and reeked of panic under a layer of smug. Julia, I've been reviewing some of the recent audit feedback, and I must say it feels unusually targeted. I need to know who is leading your team on site. Michelle read it twice, then again. She looked up from the screen and stared out the glass wall of her borrowed office. Brent was just a blur across the floor, arms crossed, eyes locked on a junior engineer who looked like he might dissolve under pressure. Julia's reply was even shorter. Brent, the lead was selected by your board. Jay, that was it. No name, no defense. Just the facts. His own board handed her the scalpel, and now he was bleeding from 1,000 documented cuts. Michelle didn't smile. She didn't need to. She wrote her next report that evening, lit by the glow of 2 monitors and the hiss of the HVAC system. Headline read, Unsubstantiated Vendor Payments Phase Roman 2 Summary. 57 pages, 15 flagged entries, 3 confirmed wire transfers to companies owned by Derek Owens. It ended with one line in bold, recommendation, escalate to internal legal and financial crime review committee. She signed it, closed the file, shut the light. Brent could feel the walls closing in. Michelle, she just kept building them, one spreadsheet at a time. The room was dead quiet before he even stepped inside. It was supposed to be a standard alignment meeting, compliance check-in with 2 board observers, the internal legal counsel, and Julia leading point. Michelle sat 3 seats down, calm and composed in her navy blazer, flipping through a stack of procurement summaries with red-flagged entries. The door hadn't even clicked shut when Brent's voice broke the air like a drunk car crash at midnight. What the hell is she doing here? Chairs shifted, a pen dropped. One of the board members gave a slow blink like he was about to witness a public colonoscopy. Brent's face was fire truck red, jaw clenched like it might crack off. This is a conflict of interest. You know this is a conflict. She worked here, she's biased. She's been gunning for me since the day I let her go. Michelle didn't flinch. She set her pen down and folded her hands neatly in front of her. I'm not here for you, Brent. Oh, come on. She met his eyes, cold, steady, controlled. No conflict, she said flatly. Just the truth you were too scared to see. That shut him up, for a beat. Julia leaned back in her chair, one ankle crossed casually over the other. Brent, she said, voice cool and surgical, you should remember, we didn't appoint Michelle. Your board did. They requested a lead with first-hand familiarity of your systems, contracts, and vendor approval chains. Brent turned to the board rep like a kid begging for a parent to overrule the teacher. You knew she'd come in biased. This isn't an audit, it's a witch hunt. The legal counsel cleared her throat. The documentation provided has been verifiable and thorough. I've seen no sign of emotional or procedural bias. Only factual findings. Michelle didn't look at anyone but Brent. She didn't need to raise her voice. She'd spent too many years letting men like him own the volume. The spotlight, the final word, not today. You fired me for catching the same discrepancies that triggered this audit. You mocked me, dragged me out like trash. And now those same old-school instincts are the reason your board is protecting its legal backside. Brent's lips twitched. He looked like he wanted to lunge across the table and flip it. But instead, he did what cowards do when they realize the bullets are real. He sputtered. I'll go to the press, he hissed. I'll leak this whole thing. Julia raised an eyebrow. So your plan is to publicly admit your CFO was being audited by the same forensic accountant he fired without cause, and that the board hired her back to clean up the mess you made? No one laughed, but Michelle could feel the tension crack just slightly. Brent's voice dropped. This isn't over. Michelle stood, gathered her files. For you, it just might be. She walked out without another word. Outside the conference room, hallway looked the same ugly top carpet, same flickering light near the elevators. But something in the air had changed. The silence didn't hum with humiliation anymore, it pulsed with power. Michelle had faced him, not with rage, not with revenge, with truth documented, signed, delivered, and it had landed like a hammer on dry rot. Michelle submitted the final report at 9:42 a.m. on a Monday. No fanfare. just an encrypted file upload. Clean subject line, phase Roman 4 summary, vendor abuse and financial misconduct findings, and her signature in clean Helvetica at the bottom of page 118. The table of contents alone read like a murder weapon: 34 flagged wire transfers, 10 LLCs tied to personal associates, 5 expense codes rewritten retroactively under Brent's login, and a final section, newly added after a second junior staffer came forward, detailing the pattern structure of off-book reimbursements and falsified compliance sign-offs. The language was dry, but anyone reading between the lines could see it. Fraud, wire fraud, RICO exposure. It wasn't just shady accounting anymore, it was a criminal enterprise. By 2 p.m., the board called an emergency session. By 4:17, Brent was officially placed on leave pending legal and regulatory review. The memo went out to all employees. No detail, no spin, just a statement of absence and transition. The internal Slack channel lit up with emoji-laced reactions and cryptic gifs. Someone even posted a clip from The Departed. Michelle didn't look at any of it. She was back at her hotel, barefoot on the cold floor, sipping green tea while watching the sky turn steel gray over the skyline. She didn't feel joy, not exactly. She felt stillness. For the first time in a long while, no one was gaslighting her. No one was editing her warnings. The facts had spoken and the consequences followed. That was all she'd ever wanted, for the work to mean something. Later that evening, she stepped into the elevator at HQ to return her visitor badge. As the doors slid shut, the company's general counsel, Maria Delgado, stepped in beside her. "I read the full report," Maria said quietly. "You didn't just save the board, you saved the company." Michelle gave a small nod. "I just followed the trail. You could have framed it harder. You didn't editorialize, you didn't embellish. I didn't need to." Maria held the silence for a beat. Then, "Thank you, Michelle, really?" Michelle didn't reply. She didn't need to. In the lobby, she dropped her access badge in the return box. No ceremony, no handshake, no speech. Just a clean exit when she was denied the first time around. At 11:36 p.m., her phone buzzed. It was Brent. The message preview sat on her lock screen like an oil slick. "We can still fix this. Call me. No one else needs to know." She stared at it for a full minute, thumb hovering. Then she locked the phone, placed it face down on the nightstand, and went to bed. No reply, not now, not ever, because the fix he wanted wasn't justice, it was silence. And Michelle had finally learned the power of saying nothing at all. The sirens didn't wail. No boots kicked indoors. The feds don't do drama, they do precision. At exactly 10:04 a.m., 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled up to the side entrance of Exforia's corporate HQ. 4 agents in plain suits stepped out like clockwork, IDs already out, eyes sharp and unblinking. Upstairs, Brent was mid-presentation in the Innovation Theater, clicking through a deck on streamlined scalability for a room full of nervous stakeholders and 2 very bored interns. Michelle stood in the hallway just outside the glass wall, arms crossed, blending into a crowd of badge-carrying nobodies. She watched as Brent blustered on stage, sleeves rolled, tie crooked, gesturing at charts that looked impressive until you realized none of the numbers actually meant anything. His voice carried through the glass, smug, self-assured, oblivious. Then came the shift. An assistant leaned into the conference room, whispered something into the ear of a senior VP, who immediately paled and stood. Seconds later, the agent stepped in, calm, collected, flashing credentials like business cards dipped in steel. The room stilled. Brent froze mid-sentence, laser pointer still aimed at a slide that read, "Optimizing transparency." The irony almost made Michelle chuckle. The lead agent spoke quietly, but everyone heard it anyway. "Brent Carver, you're under investigation for financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit corporate racketeering. Please come with us," he sputtered. "What? There's no way, my legal team, this isn't how," but it was. The click of the handcuffs echoed louder than the agent's voice. His wrists were bound, his face pale and contorted in a mix of shock and fury. The room didn't gasp, it didn't flinch, it just watched, like a long-delayed ending to a movie nobody liked but couldn't stop watching. Michelle stayed rooted in place, invisible behind the tinted corridor glass. Brent didn't see her, didn't see the ghost he tried to bury months ago, standing tall and still while his kingdom crumbled under fluorescent lighting and government protocol. As the agents walked him out, she turned. The front desk hadn't changed. Same chipped counter, same pen tethered to the stand by a broken chain. The receptionist barely looked up as Michelle approached. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old badge, one they'd tried to erase like she'd never mattered. She placed it gently on the desk. No speech, no farewell, just the badge and closure. Outside, she slipped on her sunglasses and walked calmly down the steps as chaos bloomed behind her. News alerts pinged phones. The stock price began hemorrhaging before lunch. Analysts called it unexpected instability. Insiders knew better. She didn't need to say anything. The numbers had spoken. The facts had marched. Truth had stood its ground. And as she passed the front doors one last time, she whispered under her breath, just loud enough for herself, "Never working here again? You're damn right." What really hit me in this story was how powerfully restraint can speak. When you're being pushed out or silenced, it's tempting to lash out, but sometimes, letting the truth unfold methodically is the most devastating move you can make. There's real dignity in winning without shouting. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.